Everyone talks about compounding like it's this beautiful, elegant force that quietly makes people rich while they sleep. You hear it in finance books, on YouTube, from retirement accounts, from parents, from anyone who has ever tried to explain why investing matters. The message is always clean and reassuring. Start early, stay consistent, let time do the rest. But for a huge number of normal people, that story feels incomplete because the first years of compounding do not feel elegant at all. They feel irritating. They feel underwhelming. They feel like you're doing everything right and getting almost nothing back. And if we're being honest, that early disappointment is where a lot of people quietly lose faith. They don't announce it. They don't make a dramatic speech about giving up on wealth building. They just stop. They reduce the contribution. They skip a month, then another. Then eventually the whole plan becomes something they used to do. That's the real danger. Not ignorance, not lack of access, not even bad intentions. It's discouragement at the exact stage where the process is supposed to feel most unimpressive. Why the early years feel so frustrating. Think about how this feels in real life. You finally decide to get serious. You automate $500 a month, maybe $800 if you're disciplined. You cut back on convenience spending. You skip some of the lifestyle upgrades your friends are making. You move money into a broad market index fund and wait for the famous magic to show up. Then you check the account a year later and the return looks small enough to feel almost insulting. You're thinking, I gave up dinners out, random online shopping, spontaneous weekends away, and this is what I get? A few $100s, maybe less. In some years, you might even do everything right and still open the app to see barely any visible progress because the market had a weak stretch. That is the emotional gap nobody explains well. The sacrifice is immediate. The reward is delayed. Your discipline feels real today. The payoff still feels theoretical. And the human brain is terrible at staying loyal to systems where the pain is visible now and the benefit is blurry later. Why people misread compounding. That's why so many people end up telling themselves a story that sounds rational, but usually isn't. They start believing compounding only works for people who already have serious money. People with 100 grand, people with stock grants, people with high salaries, people who bought homes before everything became expensive, people who got lucky. For everyone else, compounding feels less like a superpower and more like a slogan. But the problem isn't that compounding is fake. The problem is that compounding is backloaded. Most of the visible reward shows up later. The first stretch is heavy on effort and light on excitement. The later stretch is where the curve starts doing what people promised it would do from the beginning. If you don't understand that timing, you'll judge the process too early and abandon it before the math gets interesting. The 843 pattern. A useful way to understand this is the 843 pattern. It's not a law of nature, and it's not a guaranteed formula, but it's a powerful mental model. The first major chunk often takes around 8 years. The next comparable leap can take around 4 more. The next can take around 3. 8, 4, 3. Same investor, same behavior, same basic habit. But the timeline compresses because the base gets larger. That larger base is the whole story. Early on, you are building mostly with contributions. Later, the portfolio starts helping you in a way that feels almost unfair. And that's exactly the phase most people never reach because they confuse a slow start with a broken system. Setting more realistic expectations. Now let's slow down and be more realistic than a lot of finance content usually is. If you model compounding at 12% every year, the curve looks exciting fast, but that can create the wrong expectations. The long-run total return history of the S&P 500 is around 10%, not 12%. And major firms like Vanguard are currently projecting much more muted annualized returns for U.S. equities over the next decade, roughly 3.9% to 5.9%. That does not mean investing is pointless. It means your planning assumptions should be humble, even if your discipline is strong. So instead of pretending every normal person should expect a heroic return number, let's use compounding the right way. Not as fantasy, but as structure. Not as hype, but as leverage. What early compounding actually looks like. Imagine someone contributes $10,000 per year, around $833 a month, into a diversified portfolio. Depending on returns, fees, taxes, and market sequence, the exact path will vary. But the emotional pattern is remarkably consistent. In the early years, the account mostly reflects the person's own effort. If the balance reaches $30,000 or $40,000, even a good year in the market won't feel dramatic. A 10% gain on $40,000 is just $4,000. Helpful, yes. Life-changing, no. Your annual contribution is still doing more work than the market. That's why the beginning feels slow. The system is not failing. The system is still being built. You are still pouring the concrete. And it's very hard to feel rich while you're still pouring concrete. The first mindset shift. This is the first critical shift in mindset. Stop asking a small portfolio to impress you. That's not its job. A small portfolio's job is to become a bigger portfolio. That sounds obvious, but emotionally it changes everything. In year 2, year 3, even year 5, the goal is not to feel amazed by returns. The goal is to prove that you can keep the machine running. Because at that stage, behavior matters more than performance. A person who contributes steadily through a boring, volatile, ceremonious, unimpressive first phase is usually building the exact foundation that makes later compounding possible. The investor who keeps waiting to feel motivated by the numbers often never gets there. Why modern life makes this harder, and here's where modern reality matters. It is genuinely harder to stay patient now because people aren't just competing with impatience, they're competing with pressure. Bankrate's recent reporting shows only 46% of Americans have enough emergency savings to cover 3 months of expenses, and 24% have none at all. Credit card debt is not some fringe problem either. NerdWallet reports that among households carrying revolving credit card debt, the average amount was over $10,500. And nearly half of Americans say card debt feels normal. Mortgage rates remain elevated too, with Freddie Mac putting the average 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.00% on March 5th, 2026. Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies continues to show severe housing strain and record rent burdens. So when someone interrupts investing, it's not always because they lack discipline. Sometimes they're just getting hit from every direction by real life. The right order of operations. That matters because it changes the advice. If you have no emergency cushion and high-interest revolving debt, your first job is not to worship compounding. Your first job is to protect the system that will let you stay invested later. A lot of people sabotage long-term investing because they try to build stage 3 before stage 1 exists. If a car repair, medical bill, or job disruption forces you to liquidate investments at the wrong moment, the portfolio never gets the uninterrupted runway compounding needs. So the smarter framework is simple. First, create financial breathing room. Second, reduce expensive debt that compounds against you faster than investments usually compound for you. Third, automate investing hard enough that it becomes boring. Once that base exists, compounding stops being a motivational poster and starts becoming a real engine. Rebecca versus Marcus. Now think about two people. Rebecca and Marcus both start at 27. Both invest about $800 a month. Both begin with good intentions. After 5 years, neither looks rich. That's the point. Rebecca feels underwhelmed too, but she understands something Marcus doesn't. Early-stage compounding is not supposed to look glamorous. So she stays in the game. She keeps buying through boring markets, nervous markets, even ugly markets. Marcus looks at his account, compares it to what he imagined, and concludes that the process is too slow. He doesn't call it quitting. He calls it being practical. He uses the money elsewhere. More comfort now. More visible lifestyle now. Less invisible waiting. That decision feels good for a while because immediate consumption is emotionally louder than future growth. But 10 years later, the difference between them is no longer subtle. Rebecca didn't just contribute more, she crossed into the phase where the portfolio started carrying real weight. Marcus never made it that far. He didn't lose because he was reckless. He lost because he misread the first chapter as the whole book. The most expensive psychological mistake. That is one of the most expensive psychological mistakes in personal finance. Evaluating a long-term system on short-term emotional feedback. Human beings are wired to trust visible evidence. If a gym routine works, maybe your energy improves in weeks. If a diet works, maybe the mirror changes in months. But investing is crueler than that. You can do the right thing consistently for years and still feel like the visible result is lagging behind the effort. That delay creates doubt. Doubt creates inconsistency. Inconsistency destroys compounding. So the investor who wins isn't always the one with the highest IQ or the perfect market view. It's often the person who learns not to emotionally overreact to the boring middle. Why volatility feels personal. There's another reason the early stage feels bad. Volatility looks personal when the numbers are small. If your portfolio is modest and the market drops, it can feel like the system is mocking you. You contribute all year, then one correction wipes out what felt like hard-earned progress. But during accumulation years, that volatility is often helping more than your emotions allow you to see. Lower prices mean your new money buys more shares. The investors who built serious wealth were not just the ones who bought in perfect conditions. They were the ones who kept buying through uncomfortable conditions. Staying invested through downturns has historically mattered far more than trying to time the perfect entry. That's easy to say and hard to do, but it becomes easier when you understand what phase you're actually in. If you're still building the base, volatility is not automatically an enemy. It's often just the discount window wearing a scary costume. The transition phase. The next key shift happens when annual returns begin approaching annual contributions. That's the transition phase. It's subtle at first. You open the account and realize the market did almost as much work as you did. That changes the emotional texture of investing. For the first time, progress feels less like pushing a boulder uphill and more like rolling something that wants to move. This is also the stage where interruption becomes much more expensive. Early on, missing a month hurts a little. Later, breaking consistency hurts more because the machine is finally starting to reward consistency in a visible way. That's why people who make it into this phase often become much calmer investors. They've seen enough evidence to stop demanding constant reassurance. When your money starts doing more than you do, then comes the stage almost everyone talks about, but too few people experience firsthand. Returns meaningfully exceeding contributions. This is when your money starts doing more than you do. Not because you became smarter overnight, not because you found a better hack, not because you suddenly got aggressive, simply because the base got large enough. And when that happens, the strategy changes. Earlier, the focus was building. Now, the focus is protecting the compounding engine from your own worst impulses. Panic selling, lifestyle inflation, constant tinkering. Rating accounts because the balance looks big enough. In the late stage, the enemy is no longer slow growth. The enemy is interference. Why starting earlier really matters. This is also why starting earlier matters so much, but not for the cliche reason alone. Yes, more years in the market matter. But more importantly, starting earlier means reaching the emotionally rewarding phase while you still have enough life ahead of you to benefit from it. A person who starts at 25 may reach meaningful acceleration around 40. A person who starts at 40 may still experience acceleration, but much later with less runway. That should not discourage late starters. It should simply make the mission clearer. Start where you are. Expect the first phase to feel slower than you want. Build the structure anyway. You are not behind because your account still looks small. You are behind only when you stop building a system that could have become large. Compounding applies to careers too. There's a similar pattern in careers, and that matters because income and investing reinforce each other. The first years of a career are usually skill-heavy and reward-light. You are learning, proving, adjusting, building reputation. Raises can feel small. Promotions can feel slow. Then for some people, a switch flips. Skills compound, credibility compounds, network compounds. Opportunities show up faster, compensation rises on a bigger base. If you leave every path too early because progress feels too slow, you can accidentally reset your own curve over and over. The same person who understands compounding and investing should learn to recognize compounding in capability. In both cases, the beginning feels less impressive than it deserves. In both cases, most of the visible reward arrives after a long stretch of not looking special. What a normal person should do next. So what should a normal person actually do with all this? First, build enough cash stability that you are not forced to sabotage long-term investing every time life gets expensive. Second, kill high-interest debt aggressively if it is charging you more than your reasonable long-term investing assumptions are likely to earn. Third, automate contributions at a level you can survive in bad months, not just good months. Fourth, judge progress by process first and portfolio second. And fifth, when your account still looks unimpressive after a few years, remember that this is not evidence against compounding. It is usually evidence that you are still in the phase where you are doing most of the lifting. That is normal. That is how almost every serious wealth-building journey begins. Look forward, not backward. The biggest mistake people make is looking backward and using the past few years as proof that the future won't improve. The smarter move is to look forward. Ask a better question. If this contribution habit continues uninterrupted for another 10 or 15 years, what kind of machine am I building? Because that answer is usually far more encouraging than the current balance suggests. The wealth is not absent. It is early. The curve is not broken. It is unfinished. And once you understand that, your behavior changes. You stop needing the portfolio to entertain you. You stop measuring success by whether the app feels exciting. You stop confusing patience with passivity. You realize that in the first stage, staying in the game is the win. In the second stage, consistency becomes leverage. In the third stage, restraint becomes the superpower. The real lesson of compounding. Compounding does not fail most people because the math is weak. It fails them because the beginning is emotionally unconvincing. The first years ask for discipline before they offer proof. That is why the 8-4-3 idea matters. It gives shape to the waiting. It tells you that the slow phase is not a personal indictment. It tells you that your frustration is common, your doubts are predictable, and your impatience is expensive. And it reminds you of the one truth that matters most. Compounding is not a scam, not a myth, not a toy for the already wealthy. It is simply a process that reveals its power late. And the people who benefit most are usually not the most brilliant. They are the ones who understood the timeline well enough not to quit before the curve finally turned in their favor. Thanks for watching.